Hey everyone, welcome to the HASHR8 Podcast. I am the Bitcoin Broski, joined by a very special guest today. And this is the first full video version of the HASHR8 Podcast. So thank you to those who are tuning in for the first time on YouTube, Twitch, Periscope, LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever you're watching. And for the podcast listeners, we of course appreciate your continued support. Today on the show, I am joined by, so normally when I do these introductions, no one can see who I'm talking to, right? So I get to build it up, but now everyone can see you. And Leslie, I'm really happy that you're able to come on the show. Leslie Lamb is the head of institutional sales at Amber Group. She also hosts a really kick-ass podcast. For anyone who is not already listening to the Crypto Unstacked podcast, make sure that you head to Leslie's Twitter and subscribe to that podcast today. But without further ado, Leslie, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. I appreciate you having me on from podcaster to podcastee for the first time. So yeah, I'm very excited to be here.
This should be a fun talk. I've got a lot of questions for you. Your podcast is very well done. But before we get into all of that, I'd love to hear your crypto story, like Leslie BC before crypto. How did you get started and get into Bitcoin and crypto?
Yeah, so I was introduced to crypto actually very early on during the summer of 2012 in Berlin, Germany, actually. So for those of you who don't know, Germany, it was dubbed the Bitcoin capital very early on. And when I mean, for those of you who don't know Germany, meaning Germany in the context of crypto, it was actually a very, very vibrant place early on for Bitcoin payments. And there's actually a district in Berlin called Kreuzberg, which is filled with cafes and bars that at the time in 2012 took Bitcoin as a form of payment, believe it or not. And so that was 2012. A year later in 2013, I had went back to Germany, this time to Hamburg, so south in Germany, to work on a socioeconomic urban planning type research project. And the focus of my research was on the emergence of new money systems in sustaining local economies. And I was really just interested in looking at how the sustainable economy of tomorrow could be born from a self-governing society. And I looked at the emergence of experimental money systems on both the local and international level. So looking at community-driven currencies, as well as mobile money. So M-Pesa comes to mind in informal economies such as Kenya. And for context, right, this was about the time that a company called BitPesa was just launching their crypto services in Africa. And they were actually one of the first crypto companies that I spoke with. And, generally speaking, 2013 was a really stellar year for Bitcoin, right? Because it was just such a year for milestones, right? Bitcoin's market cap had passed $1 billion. The exchange rate of Bitcoin reached 100 USD to one Bitcoin. The first Bitcoin ATM was created. Overstock, an e-commerce company, had just announced at that time that they would be taking Bitcoin as payment later in 2014. So it was just a phenomenal year for growth within the Bitcoin space. And actually, I brought one of the OG Bitcoin magazines right here. This is from 2014, January 2014. This one says 2013 at the bottom. I think it was a misprint. But this was, the cover of Bitcoin
Is that the
magazine.
Ethereum edition?
This is the Ethereum edition. This was the intro to Ethereum after Vitalik had first proposed Ethereum in late 2013, right? This was a time when Vitalik was really writing all of the articles. You flipped to every single one and it just was authored by Vitalik. And he co-founded the Bitcoin magazine, so it sort of made sense that he would have ownership over a lot of the content. But anyways, the front cover is Ethereum, and you can tell it's dated actually, and I'll show this to you right here, because of blockchain.com's ad way back when. That was their logo. And also Mt.Gox, they feature Mt.Gox.
Look at that.
On the phone. and a bunch of other names just in the back here that don't exist anymore, right? And this was when Mt.Gox, so this was when Mt.Gox was still alive.
Right.
It was not 2 months later in March of 2013 or 2014, 14. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that Mt.Gox imploded completely and then filed for bankruptcy. But anyways, this is one of my favorite relics, and I have others as well, but I thought this was particularly fun to show your audience here. But yeah, I mean, that's just a bit of nostalgia right there that I wanted to bring. But anyways, yeah, it was during my research when I began to really deeply venture into the crypto space. You know, I was really grasping for information by the straws, right? You didn't have, you know, really like the types of data analytics platforms, the robust media platforms, you know, the miner update guys definitely were not around. Mining itself was just like, you probably knew people and that's where you got the information, right? Just on one-on-one conversations. Sure. And so, yeah, I just really wanted to learn about how small businesses could potentially leverage this new type of digital currency called Bitcoin for financial sustainability reasons, right? And so I started to meet a lot of people in the space, but ultimately, you know, stay the course in traditional finance. So after university, went on to private banking in New York at Brown Brothers Harriman. So I come from a traditional financial background, you know, in terms of my career. And there actually I wrote the first piece on crypto. This was in December of 2017. So that was really cool. They didn't bite, but, you know, I wrote it and published it.
Sure.
They didn't start offering products then, but you know, it was just kind of cool to just experiment with that. And so this was in New York, and then a couple of years later, I moved to London, got to meet more people there, more on the venture side. And then around late 2018, moved over to Hong Kong, actually. And that's when I started my company called 21 Landmark Capital, which was working with digital asset companies based out in the West. Mm-hmm. Looking to really help these guys access capital and networks in Asia. And so a company that I worked with early on was after their Series A round was Tagomi. And Tagomi recently was acquired by Coinbase, yes. Right? So that was really interesting to see. And yeah, so, and really when I met the Amber guys, this was in late 2019. So I'd been doing 21 Landmark for about a year or so. And really, I think I just met these guys, you know, at the right place, at the right time. This was when they were when they were closing their Series A round, and you know they were looking to scale. So I was brought on to look after the institutional offshore business, you know, covering regions such as Hong Kong, you know, Singapore, places in the West that are major trading hubs. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so that's my nutshell to crypto and also to Amber as well.
That's awesome. So we have a little bit of a connection there in Hamburg. I think around the same time that you were working there, I was working there.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, I was in the shipbuilding industry for a while, and we worked with a major client that was just outside of Hamburg in Papenburg. So spent a lot of time in Hamburg. Right there, there's that little channel, the river in the city. I remember sitting there and having beers. It was a nice little place.
Yeah, that's what everyone would do. Just go by the water. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. So Amber Group, let's talk about Amber Group for a little while. So you came over to Amber Group from 21 Landmark Capital, and you're there managing their institutional sales. For anyone listening who doesn't understand or know what Amber Group is, let's give a high-level overview.
Yeah, so Amber Group is an integrated crypto finance platform. We have offices in Asia, so I'm based in Hong Kong here, and we have other offices in Asia as well, and also in North America, specifically Vancouver, where we have a little burgeoning team there. Okay. We were founded in 2015 by 5 partners who all come from similar traditional financial backgrounds, have worked in institutional finance, trading, technology, you know, from the firms that you already know, right? Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, Deutsche Bank, Bloomberg. And so these were guys who really had a good understanding of how the financial infrastructure works, you know, for trading the traditional markets, but just had this itch really early on to trade crypto in their PA together, basically. And so they were all either colleagues or friends who knew each other really early on. But I'd say 2017 is when we really got into crypto. And we've grown substantially since our Series A round, which was closed earlier this year, led by Paradigm and Pantera and other investors. We're registered as a money services business with FinCEN in the U.S. And just a bit about our offerings, because that's where a lot of people go, oh wow, I didn't realize that you guys were up to this, that you guys offer this, right? So what we offer now is a suite of secondary market services across trading, wealth management, and financing solutions. And we work with really market participants all over the world. So it could be with miners, right, such as yourselves, with venture funds, token issuers, family offices, right? So really the whole gamut, focusing on the institutional space. Our bread and butter from the get-go was electronic market making. So a lot of people know us as a market maker, right?
Gotcha.
But we've sort of grown from that. That was probably the core of our business early on. But around that, we've really been able to build up our OTC streaming service, our execution service business. We're very active in margin trading, treasury management, collateralized lending, structured products, really, the full 360, right?
Sure.
And so, you can really think of us as, this one platform, your gateway to smart crypto finance, to really meet all of your needs for crypto trading and investing and storing assets all in one place. And I would say that's a very high level overview of what we do.
Sure. So I think it's obligatory at this point. Everyone that comes on the show, I have to ask them about Hashrate Futures. It's like my pet project. I love everything that has to do with these derivatives products that are springing up around mining. So how are you guys looking at these? Are you offering any of these products to your clients at this point?
At this point, no, that's not our particular focus. I know that there are certain firms, so whether they be OTC desks or their exchanges, right, who do have a focus on offering niche products like this, which at this point in time is still quite niche, I'd say.
Absolutely.
But for us, our view is always to figure out what we're experts in.
Sure.
What we are good at what we've been good at historically, what our client needs are, and then tailoring our offerings to our client base, right? And so we definitely work with a lot of miners, but I think what's interesting is to point out that a large part of that ecosystem that we work with are guys based in Asia. And you might have heard, there's this distinction between the mining communities, perhaps in the East and the West, although I won't say this is a black and white distinction. One that, in the West, perhaps cares a lot more about risk management, cares a lot more about, hedging, putting on hedging structures, right? Really don't want to market time, have a more conservative approach to perhaps liquidating from their Bitcoin balance sheet, right? And there are other guys, perhaps in Asia, who are just a lot more risk on, right? They don't have this methodical way of managing their Bitcoin reserves, their Bitcoin portfolio. And really, I'll just say this, right? They love to punt. And so there's really a whole gamut of miners that I think is very important to listen to what they want to do at the end of the day, right? Yeah.
Just to jump in on that. So why do you think there is that difference? What breeds the difference in mindset between the East and the West?
It's the trading culture, I'd say. And this is rooted in traditional finance, not only in crypto. I think crypto is just an extension of the mentality that's really been cultivated in, Asia culture. Perhaps it could be the retail mindset, right, of getting in the next hottest thing when it comes to startups as well. It's high performance growth, right? It's let's amp this company on steroids, try to get as many customers as possible, right, and ship out as many products as possible, to then scale as quick as possible, right? And so there's this mentality of really, really fast growth, right? People like to say, get rich quick, right? Short-term profitability.
Right.
And it's not like we condone this as Amber, or say, oh yeah, this is exactly how we think about the space as well. No, not at all. It's really just understanding that, well, the folks who are getting into crypto didn't just come out of the rock and say, we're now trading crypto. These are guys who either have been trading the traditional markets, right? It could be penny stocks, could be regular old, bonds and equities, and are thinking about crypto as just another alternative to diversify their portfolio, and they want to give it a try, right? It's more or less experimental,
Sure.
right? And there are other guys who say, what, I come from a tech background. I really understand the crypto ethos, and I'm all in, right? Both on the CeFi side and DeFi side, perhaps, and are fully embracing what crypto really is about, right? And so there's not really like one answer or another that says, this is exactly the reason why we see these differences in the East and in the West. It's just that the culture here, I would say in Asia, perhaps, more specifically, countries in East Asia, is this mentality around short-term profitability. And that has been attached as sort of a, it could be negative stigma to crypto. And what we as Amber want to do is say, let's flip that on its head. Let's, make sure we offer our clients, right, returns, in the short term, right? No one likes to just put money in somewhere that is not going to earn anything, right?
Sure.
But at the same time, really push the importance and highlight the importance of long-term thinking, right? Long-term sustainability. How does something like Bitcoin work for you over the long term alongside your other assets, right?
Makes sense. Yeah.
So yeah, that's more or less what I'd say right now. But I mean, you can go into lots of details around.
Yeah. I mean, it's curious, right? There's it's hard to tell why anyone does business the way that they do it, right? It's all speculation. But it seems like all of the conversations that I've had, there is such a stark difference between East and West and the mindset, and perhaps it's cultural, perhaps it's timing, right? A lot of the Eastern miners were involved in Bitcoin before those that are now springing up in the West. Not to say there weren't Bitcoin miners in North America prior to the past couple of years, but I don't think there was the large scale institutional interest that we're now seeing, just because there was still a lot of regulatory gray area. So there were some people who were very risk on, who saw and believed in the asset class, but I think that was more an Eastern philosophy is a terrible way of putting it, but an Eastern mindset when it comes to the approach to Bitcoin. So let's get into your podcast. This is I gotta say, I'm impressed. Like, podcasting is not an easy thing. And the first time that I listened to your podcast, I was blown away by the sound quality, your ability to host and to ask questions, and knowing what all goes into it. It's a subtle art, right? So I can appreciate it now that I've been doing this for about 2.5 years. But it's hats off to you. You've done an amazing job so far with Crypto Unstacked.
Just a small podcast to start, and definitely don't have the experience like what you have. But yeah, thanks so much. It's definitely a new venture for myself. I've never been comfortable with putting my views out there necessarily, right? And no less doing something like this where we're doing it face to face, right? And yeah. There's really no hiding behind anything. And yeah, it's just this idea of letting go of what people may or may not think about what you have to say, how you deliver, right? Because all of this is trial and error, right?
Absolutely.
I've stumbled A ton, and that's why there's an editing booth, right? And that's why you have the great team behind you, to really help to make tweaks and stuff like that before it's more or less polished and you have to publish, right? And that's a whole process that, I didn't really expect to need to understand so early on. I thought, well, two things: content generation, right? So you have to do that first, and then you have to record, and then you have to press the publish button, right? Yep. Pressing record is easy. Pressing the publish button is extremely hard.
Difficult. Yes.
Yes.
It's so Hashrate recently hired a producer, and before that it's just been me. And I was talking to him about this last week. It becomes your baby, right? You're spending so much time editing and nitpicking these conversations and making sure that the sound is right. And then to hand that off to someone, we published his first episode on Monday and he did a fantastic job. But even still, I caught myself like listening and just, it's that art of letting go.
Yes.
But so why did you start the podcast in the first place? What was it that led to that?
Yeah. So, during this incredibly, unprecedented period of time, really for everyone, right? The question is, how do you stay connected when this community is so fueled by, relationship building, right? In person, pressing flesh, meeting people at conferences, all over the world, right? At one point, I think I was following a couple friends around the world to all these different conferences and seeing them every other week, or every other month rather. And so we just got very used to keeping updated with what was going on with all of these different companies in the space. And we sort of took that for granted, I think, right? And, eventually I think the crypto community found ways to do things online, do things virtually. I know you've moderated a couple webinars, and we've kind of found our grounding now in the virtual world. But there's still this element of connection that I think I was really missing over the first couple months of this year. And with Amber's overall mission to really, again, right, scale, to reach more than just our own backyard, right, within Asia and some parts of other countries that we're servicing, right? We're a global crypto finance platform. And so in absence of, being able to go out there and meet people, what better way to communicate our thoughts about the space, to hear and listen to what other people are up to during this time, because crypto doesn't sleep and people are continuing to build, right? Stuff is still happening in the markets, 24/7. What better way to do that than through podcasting, which is, 100 times, 1,000 times better than just kind of writing stuff out, right? Because that only travels so far and attention span only goes so far. And so with something like podcasting, you really could, get to know the podcastee, right? Through preparation, through sort of back and forth questioning, like what we're doing right now. And really just, keep updated about what's going on with other parts of the crypto ecosystem. And then from that, the idea is, right, to communicate new things that we're up to at Amber, and continue to, help either form partnerships because, someone's heard the podcast and said, oh, that's really cool, right? I didn't know that company did that. Now, I'm going to go engage in that company, right? So it's helping out the other parts of the ecosystem, hopefully, in the long term. But also for ourselves, I'd say, and this is probably more selfishly speaking, is to, really hone in on, what we are currently thinking and observing about the space and being able to bring that as well to the market, right? And being able to do that in, a way that is quicker than, just kind of what we've been doing for a long time, which is generating quality through writing or generating content through writing.
So being that you're based in Hong Kong, when it comes to the Asian markets, specifically East Asia, how do they respond to podcasts? Is there a big podcast culture there? I mean, in America, it seems like everyone listens to podcasts. How about in Asia?
Yeah, for sure. The content or the content reach for podcasts is really huge when it comes to education.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people here in Asia have just caught on to the whole virtual thing a lot quicker.
Okay.
Um, and you can see it just by the amount of time people are spending on their phones, right?
Sure.
Spending in front of a screen. Let's just call it that, right?
Screen time.
Spent, yeah, exactly, right? Screen time metric probably will blow through the roof,
Right.
compared to a lot of other regions. And so when it comes to learning new things, right? And really trying to grasp more and more information, a lot of people do that via videos, right? Via podcasts, and they don't necessarily always have to be long podcasts, hour-long stuff. No, a lot of the times, short content, micro content is what really is able to penetrate, right? An audience base, a listener base who really wants to just know stuff, right? And so the more you can produce, from sort of an existing set of content, the better, right?
Sure.
And that's really, I think, the strategy that either a lot of podcasters or just content creators have latched onto. In general, it's just being out there more, and doing that either visually like this or just through audio.
It's funny that you mentioned that. The trends are definitely showing that smaller pieces of content, shorter pieces of content are preferred. I mean, TikTok is enormous, I think, everywhere now. And then Quibi just launched, and Quibi is basically taking a traditional art form in movies and in television and breaking it down into bite-sized episodes that you can watch while you're on the train or on a short commute. And I wonder, I hope there's still room for us long form producers out there.
No, I think the market will always have an affinity, and I say the market meaning the crypto market will always have an affinity towards quality content, right? And
Sure.
You pair that up with your own newsletter, right, which I think is really great. You get the writing aspect, you get to be more in detail, but also you sort of have this like snappy, every week you're coming out with either multiple or one podcast at least, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a wonderful combination to have. So definitely long form will not die. That's
well, and
that's for sure.
I guess cat's out of the bag, but pretty soon Hashrate will start producing short form content as well. So we have some new products that we're going to be launching in the next couple of weeks that will tailor to that 8 to 10 minute crowd that are looking for some smaller bits of information. So you had talked about, for me, your background is fascinating because you got into crypto, very early on, right? 2012 is almost the beginning, and you took a keen interest and you brought, finished your schooling, went the traditional finance route, but you always had that as a part of your makeup, right? Your composition, what you were fired up about, I would say. So when you were in New York working, and you got to publish that first piece, right? You're talking like that's top of the market, really, right? December 17 is when Bitcoin price was booming. So what was that conversation like as you're in that very corporate setting for people who maybe weren't as receptive to Bitcoin?
Yeah, so at that time, I was working very closely with the head of FX or currency strategy, rather.
Yeah.
At that time, his name's Mark Chandler, has been featured on Bloomberg, multiple times as a regular guest, and he's since moved on to another company now. But he has always just cultivated this sense of curiosity, I think, in the people that he was working with, especially the younger crowd, right? Guys who are just coming out of college, people perhaps who had just been working for a few years, but wanted to kind of understand all aspects of what the bank was doing. So for him, right, being a currency strategist, being a political economist, being a historian, something like crypto is just fascinating, right? Now, he was skeptical for a period of time, and he probably is still very skeptical about the trajectory of this space, right? So it was not like he was condoning the merits of Bitcoin or anything like that throughout. It was just this healthy sense of, you have a question about that, you're interested in that, why don't I give you a platform? Why don't you publish something in our FX quarterly outlook, you know? And do it in a way that the bank will like, which was from a regulatory, you know, compliant way, right? And so I was talking about, I think, the uncharted regulatory waters of crypto. So basically something that no one would read now, especially given the content that's out there. But at the time, that was sort of all the rage, right? Like, how was each country treating cryptocurrency, right? And how were the regulatory bodies of each country treating different types of cryptocurrency, right? And just mainly Bitcoin at that point, right? Bitcoin and maybe Ethereum. And so anyways, basically, you know, I'm just super grateful to have gotten that mind share, right? From him, to be able to publish something that I thought, whew, you know, this is going to kick it, right? And you know, the bank's really going to run with this, and people are going to chime in over time, knowing that there was this one piece that was published in 2017, right? And that others would be, you know, referencing and so on and so forth. I don't think there's been another crypto piece out from the bank since. And even my own piece, I think, has been archived somewhere. I can't find it anymore.
That's it. You set the bar. Like, it was just too high. After that, they couldn't. So they didn't even try. It was just the one piece to rule them all.
I mean, it was just, the bank really wasn't putting anything out. And again, right, I totally understand. It's because, you know, this bank has been around for over 200 years now, right? And, you know, the founding roots of the bank was in merchant banking. You know, you go all the way back to that, and you're talking about a company who has very historical roots, servicing, you know, many clients now all over the world, but at the time, particularly in the northeastern corridor of the United States. And so when you just think about the pace of, you know, kind of product innovation, right? It's always kept along a thread, right? Of, again, going back to this theme of, what are we good at as a bank, right? What are we, or what should we evolve into product-wise over time, given what we're good at and given our sort of new client base, right? That we've been able to bring on board, and then kind of iterate products from there, right? No way is a bank like that, who's been around for 200 years, going to just say, oh, great, some person within our bank wrote about crypto, now let's go figure out.
Go all in, everyone.
Yeah, all in, right? It's not so easy, right? And it will definitely take time when, you know, you want to consider a bank like that being on a digital frontier. They might get there, and I'm sure they've been doing research. All banks, by the way, have started, done, or completed some type of research around digital assets. Let's put it that way. Even they might not want to say crypto, right? But just digital assets in general, right? For sure, these banks have thought about their stance, you know, on this thing, and it's just a matter of whether it passes their test of whether it's legitimate or not. Right.
So how, I mean, being that you're having the conversations that you're having now in your role, what's the shift been like over the past year or so? I mean, regulatorily, is there any clarity? Is there any more clarity now than there was a year ago in the US? I mean, other places it seems are advancing far past what the US is doing, but what are your thoughts
on the regulatory climate in the US, or
the regulatory climate in the US, and what you're noticing from the institutional side, if interest overall is starting to pick up?
Yeah, I mean, on the regulatory front in the US, I think it's always been step-by-step progress. There hasn't necessarily been this leapfrog of, okay, now we see that there are X number of institutions in the space, boom, that's credibility. We're going to, you know, not require companies to need this license anymore, right? If anything, it gives them more of a reason to look at the set of licenses that exist today and say, which one should we continue to push? Because it seems like there are more and more companies entering into this space, and therefore we need to be very clear about what the process is to enable the faster processing of applications, let's say, so that there's not this slog, right? This pipeline of companies who are trying to build and innovate and service customers all across the US, but are hindered because the process takes so long, right? And that's what a lot of people have complained about in regards to perhaps something like the broker-dealer license, right? Saying like, we've been stuck in the pipelines forever. The BIT license is a long storied one. I don't need to talk about that anymore. Companies who I think deserve to have one, probably still don't have one, for a number of reasons, right? And I think what they've pioneered in terms of this money transmitter license framework, perhaps I think myself that it doesn't need to be so stringent, but I think on a state-by-state basis, it makes it much more difficult because it's so fragmented. It's not just like in Hong Kong, governed by one body. Like there's no really local government, right? It's the one government. Whereas in the States, each state has its say about what goes in that jurisdiction. Right. And so for a company like Amber, who has, an MSB license with FinCEN, that doesn't necessarily enable us to go and just operate in whatever state we like, right? There are certain states that say, yeah, we prefer, but we don't require it, in which case, we're free to at least explore, right?
Sure.
Those states without really having this burden of being like, oh, we need a money transmitter license. But then again, it's also nice to know that for states that do require these licenses, well, that's a surefire no, for us to venture there. And we should, ask about, whether, let's say, a prospective, client has an entity in another jurisdiction that we might be able to do business with, right? So in some sense, it's actually quite clear because they've laid it out, which state requires what. But I'm just hoping that something a bit more cohesive will come about over time, just to make the process of dealing with clients overseas a lot easier for a lot of the Asia-based companies, who are wanting to sort of break out of the Asia mold and reach more of the, overseas Western markets, right? As those markets continue to mature as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the one problem with government is that it can often get in the way of innovation. And in the States, especially since I've graduated college, it seems to be part of the course where the government gets involved too often. And I think here there's just too many regulatory hurdles that still need to be overcome. For us as a mining company, it's a little bit easier. Things are a bit more clear since we don't have to deal with any kind of money transmission licenses, and FinCEN isn't on our radar, and we're not on theirs, thankfully, so we don't need to worry about that. But just hearing the stories from people such as yourself and others in the space, I just wish things could be easier, right? It's not helping adoption any. That's for sure. So, well, Leslie, as we get to wrapping things up here, what I would love is for you to let everyone know where they can find you. I want to make sure that we get some followers your way on Twitter, get some subscribers to the podcast, get some people onto Amber Group to find you and utilize your services. So if you could just let everyone know.
Great. Yeah, you can feel free to head on over to ambergroup.io. So that's AMBERGROUP.io. You can follow Amber Group on Twitter at AMBERGROUP_IO. And you can follow me as well, my own account at Les Lambo. So that's LESLAMB0. And there I post all of my announcements for the Crypto Unstacked podcast. And, I of course, retweet a bunch of stuff that Amber puts out as well. So especially if you want to follow content that we write, and we have a ton of stellar people, at the company who are constantly just thinking about, what's happening in the markets and just really being on top of what's happening, writing really topical stuff. We always post that on Twitter or link it to something on Medium, so just to keep up with everything that we're doing. I think Twitter is probably the best way to do that.
Absolutely. Awesome. All right. Well, Leslie, thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure chatting with you today.
Likewise. Thanks so much, Whit.
Hey, my pleasure. To the listeners out there, thank you guys for continuing to tune into the show. I hope you guys are enjoying the video format. We'll have more of that coming in the next days and weeks. And yeah, it seems like the world is getting back to normal, which is exciting. People are starting to travel again. Life is going back to how it was before all of this madness at the beginning of the year. But until we talk to you guys all again soon, we hope everyone stays safe. Thanks for tuning into the Hashrate Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please consider liking and sharing this episode with a friend. Also, remember to subscribe to our channel for more amazing content. And if you haven't already, I'd suggest you subscribe to Hashrate's weekly email difficulty adjustment. It's a newsletter focused on the most important stories in Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, and mining, delivered right to your inbox each and every Wednesday morning. You don't want to miss that. Be sure to head down to the show's notes and subscribe to Difficulty Adjustment newsletter today. And remember, each week Hashrate does a special giveaway for one subscriber to the newsletter. So by subscribing to Difficulty Adjustment newsletter, you are registered for each week's giveaway. And for those of you who don't yet follow us on Twitter, I'd encourage you to do that. We are at Hashrate. That's at H4SHR8. Thanks again, and we'll see you next episode.